Welcome to the Cannabis Cultivation and Science Podcast. I'm your host, Tad Hussey of Kiss Organics. This is the podcast where we discuss the cutting edge of growing from a science-based perspective and draw on top experts from around the industry to share their wisdom and knowledge. My guest this week is Chris Castle. Chris is the co-founder and CEO of Flora Flame out of California, currently the largest vertical indoor living soil cannabis farm. Chris is a Bay Area native who's been cultivating cannabis for 17 years, with the last 6 solely in indoor living soil. Now on to the show. Hey Chris, great to have you on the show. Thanks for coming on. We met years ago actually at PhotoX at a Fluence conference. I don't know if you remember, way back in the day.
Was that Chicago or Texas?
It was in Texas,
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I do.
And then I kind of lost touch and then reconnected here in the last couple of years. So at the Soil Summit.
Yeah, no, it was great to reconnect, and we've also been working with you guys for a little bit now too. So yeah, man, it's fun to work with you guys, and it's been a great relationship that we've been building so far. So yeah.
Well, Chris, you built this company, Flora Flame, which is a cultivation facility in California. Can you talk a little bit about yourself and then a little bit about Flora Flame?
Sure. So I'm a Bay Area native, born and raised.
How'd you get into cultivation?
Yeah.
Let's start real quick there.
So how I got into cultivation, I think I was 18 or 19, living on my own. I got kicked out of the house for smoking weed when I was 16. So, yeah, started growing when I was like 18, 19, and then had a break for a while. Got back into cultivation when I was 24, 25, working for other people. And then started doing my own thing again with Flora Flame within the last 7 years now.
So you started Flora Flame really from the ground up, from nothing. What was your vision going in to this, project?
So I was bartending at the time. This was like 2016, and I knew, cannabis was going legal in California. I wanted to take a bet on myself, and I pitched an idea to do a small licensed grow in Richmond or Oakland, like, a 20 or 50 lighter or something very modest, to an investor. I knew that we wanted to do soil style cultivation because I knew that was going to lead to better quality product just from personal experience. I didn't know anything about living soil at the time or any of these terms. But yeah, so I pitched this idea to a real estate investor and broker, and he's a good friend and mentor as well. And he had the vision to want to take this project to the next level, really. So over the course of, 6 months or so, we were looking at different properties for sale. We came across this building in Oakland that was on the outside of the green zone. As soon as Peter, the owner, as soon as he saw the building, he was like, "We're gonna buy it." He had this vision in his head to do this huge build out. That's just kind of how he thinks. And I remember over the course of the development of the project, where I went to him and I was like, "Are you sure you want to do this?" Because like the build out just kept getting bigger and bigger, and that's just the way he thought, and he wanted to stick with it and do it. He found it really exciting and challenging. I don't think he anticipated what a challenge it would be, especially post construction, which I always told him, I'm like, the real work is going to begin when we actually have plants in the building. Like, yeah, it's a lot of work with research and development and architectural and the construction phase and startup, but I'm like, yeah, the real work begins when you get plants in the building. But Yeah, and then the name Flora Flame, that was founded by my fiance. She kind of came up with the name when we were brainstorming, and the name was conceptualized in 2017. And we started off with a very small, um, we called it like our trap lab essentially, but it was this illicit facility that we set up where we had where we were testing different LEDs and KNF and living soil and learning all these different terms and taking courses and stuff. But that's really kind of where we cut our teeth and figured out how we were going to scale up what we were doing to what you see now with 400 plus lights and I think like 8,500 square feet in our state of the art facility.
Yeah, and I want to ask you some questions about that, but I just want to let listeners know we are going to be talking about this from a commercial perspective here at the beginning, but I do plan on getting some information from Chris about how he would approach home grows too, because I know there's a lot of people that listen that are not commercial cultivators, and I want to make sure the information applies to everybody. So if you can stick around through the commercial stuff and the vertical talk that we're going to do about growing vertical, then we'll get back into the, all applicable cultivation information that really goes whether you have 5 plants or 5,000. So just want to throw that out there. But let's talk a little bit more about what you're calling this trap room or trap facility at first. How big was it? How many lights? What were some of the lessons that you learned in there? Because you just kind of threw out a bunch of terms of things that you tried out, like KNF and living soils. What were your experiences?
Yeah, so that was really interesting. So it was about we had 6 lights, 3 4x8 beds. 2 of the 4x8s were initially really shallow, so like maybe 4 or 5 inches of soil, so not a lot of soil depth. And this was a gas station property that we modified to this to build out this grow essentially for us to figure out what we were going to do. So over the course of 3 years, we were working on, and when I say we, it was me and my colleague Alex, who still works with us at Flora Flame, and I worked with Alex at another grow, 10 plus years ago. So I've known him for a long time. It was really him and I that developed our SOPs, if you will. So we actually built our own soil mix initially. That was a good learning experience. And then I don't even remember where we first heard about KNF initially, but I remember we took an in-person like crash course. We drove up to somewhere in Humboldt up in near Arcata, and this guy, A World's Last Hope was his Instagram handle, and he was one of the
I know
so
him.
he was one of the few people basically talking about KNF and ferments and all this. And I remember going to the class and he was passing around the FPJA and having people drink it. And, it was just fascinating at the time.
Oh.
Yeah. It was,
Wow, I haven't heard that
I
one.
didn't drink it, but, it's like a kombucha or something, but,
Sure.
or, semi, quasi, but, yeah, it was just fascinating learning or hearing all these different terms and seeing how there was different methodology of living soil, if you will, or soilless media indoors. And so we took that crash course. I even bought, Cho's book, and me and Alex, we made all these ferments and did all these recipes, and we applied them at our little lab that we had, and fantastic results. I mean, just unbelievable trichome coverage and beautiful structured flower and flavorful. And the feedback that we were getting from people on that first run was just unbelievable. It was like, oh, okay, we're like really onto something with this. But it had its challenges too indoors, and because I had so little experience with it, but we saw that it increased pest pressure indoors, was causing other issues, and we were concerned with using those methods in a licensed market where we're going to have to go through lab testing. So we were worried about microbials or other failures. And, keep in mind, this was like 2017. And we see people in today's market using KNF like Moon Valley that are able to pass testing. So I think we've learned a lot since then. But yeah, we moved away from KNF. And the reason we pivoted was, concern for testing, but also I went to a soil conference down in Santa Barbara and heard Steve Cantwell speak. And I think this was like 2017 or 18. And was completely blown away by what he was doing indoors in a licensed market with living soil. It was just unheard of. And I could relate to him and his story, and I introduced myself and kind of helped me along the way. And then with that timing, I was able to take a soil food web course with Dr. Ingham. She had her last in-person course that she taught at this ashram in Castro Valley. It was a week long where it was just a crash course of her talking every day for 8 hours. We're building compost piles. We're using a microscope. And that was another just huge eye-opening experience for me too. And we use a lot of those methods, but indoors it's different, and I use a microscope, but maybe not to the extent that some other soil food web enthusiasts use, because I don't think it's quite that important. I think you've mentioned that too. Like, it's not a necessity to use a microscope to do living soil indoors.
Yeah, I mean, I have my microscope literally right next to me here. I'm looking at it, but I don't use it in most cases for making any actionable decisions in terms of my soil or fertility management. But I think I've shared my opinion on here already about that. I do want to just say that Steve has been such a wonderful representative and voice for the living soil community. He's really done an amazing job of straddling, the differences between folks that are into soil food web or KNF or soil testing. He's been so open-minded and accepting, and just a really great person to really show what the potential of this methodology really is. So I'm honored to consider him a colleague and friend, and know him and have seen his property. Like, his farm is beautiful. So yeah, shout out to Steve for just really doing a great job, and just the person that he is.
He's a fantastic person and friend, and yeah, I definitely feel lucky to know him. And it's a huge testament as far as how big of an influence he is to the living soil community, just based off of how good of a person he is and how open-minded he is.
Yeah, and that's the thing that him and I have talked about. Like, he may not agree with everything I say, but he says he'll listen to it, because if he can't come up with a good argument against why I might be saying something, then he's probably going to try it out, or he's probably going to adapt it, or adopt it. So the same thing for me. Like, I don't necessarily agree with all of the things that he does in his facility. Some of them to me seem like an IPM risk, and we've talked about this actually on the podcast even. But that being said, like, he pulls it off very successfully, and he's very thoughtful about how he does it. So he's not just scattering cover crops, and he's not just doing the things that he does without putting a lot of thought into why he does them. And I think that's the most important part of all of it. So
definitely.
Yeah. Well, let's get back into your build out here. So you had a very tall building that kind of, it's, if I'm remembering correctly, sort of forced you into going more vertical and doing a tiered grow or vertical grow. Can you talk a little bit about that process?
Yeah, so I remember when we started the like rough architectural phase of the project, we were just trying to, so people can picture, we bought this building, the property's 50 feet wide by I think 110 feet long, big open inside, 28 feet tall inside. So we were just trying to figure out how to design the facility and fit all the different, you know, processes that we need to fit within that space, like, you know, drying, trimming, curing, just everything. And initially, I remember we were just trying to fill how much flower space could we fit in this space. That's how little we knew. We were just trying to fill it out with just flowering and lights, flowering rooms and lights. And then we figured out we needed to build up to fit just everything we needed to do from veg to curing. So with that, I remember we came across a bad advisor, but it was not all bad, but he was familiar with vertical farming through a farm actually out in Nevada as well called The Grove. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they were a two-tiered. They were grown in soil and auto pots, but they were a two-tiered LED grow outside of Las Vegas or in Las Vegas. So he advised us to look into vertical farming. We eventually got rid of that advisor. I was introduced to Michael Williamson. I think he's with PIP now. But he cut his teeth in the industry doing managing big grows, like big outdoor grows, as well as vertical farms and helping people set up their facilities. So I was introduced to him through Fluence, and he really helped us out with the facility design and layout. Because I've never managed a facility that big. We wanted to make sure that we were going to get the dry room sizes right, the veg room, the mother space, all that, the equipment selection.
Yep.
So he was huge in helping us develop those vertical farming SOPs and just helping us wrapping our head around vertical farming. So really, we came across, or we needed to do vertical farming just purely out of necessity of being in a urban dense environment, and we could only build up, and we had to fit everything that we needed to do. So it was purely out of necessity.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a good point in terms of facility design. There's a lot of other aspects that need to come into play, and we haven't even talked about like HVAC and electrical and things like that. But just even like I know with your facility, having places to stage material was in something that you had to consider. I always like a facility to have a quarantine and R&D space, because at some point in time, if you're bringing in new genetics, you don't want to bring them directly into the facility. It'd be nice to have a space where you can grow them for a month or two and make sure they're truly clean, that's separate from everything else before they actually go into your production portion of your facility. Any sort of, before we get into the vertical aspects, what do you feel like you guys really nailed with this build out in terms of considerations, and what things do you wish, in retrospect, you'd done differently?
Well, I think overall, because it's a purpose, ground up facility, it's truly state of the art and one of a kind. So I think there's a lot of things we did do right. I think HVAC equipment selection, our environmental controls and sensors, and just the layout and design overall, because it's working. As far as things that
Can you touch on that really quick? Like what brands you're using even for HVAC and some of the things there that were really because you are state of the art. Like, can you describe some of the things that you guys have in your facility that, most facilities may not have or even be aware of?
Yeah, so for HVAC equipment, we went with a company called Cultiva. I can't remember who's their main manufacturer. It could be Train or something, but these are, specifically designed packaged units that are meant to dehumidify first and then cool second. So we have, I think, well over 200 tons of AC just on our roof. And then our environmental control system. So we use all industrial grade sensors. And then the whole system was custom designed with myself and David Lubouf. He was formerly of Grow Remote. So Grow Remote is the company. David doesn't work with them anymore just because they've had to shrink their staff and stuff. But yeah, we did a custom catered built design with the environmental control system. So it was me and David working on every aspect of that, from water irrigation, our reverse osmosis, condensate reclaim, what types of sensors, placement of sensors, just basically everything from start to finish. I would say, our equipment and then our environmental control system are like the two main things that make us stand out from other facilities.
I remember in your talk there was something related to airflow that you wished you had done a little bit differently in at least one of the rooms. Could you go into that really quickly?
Yeah, so 6 years ago, we just didn't know what we know now in terms of vertical farming and HVAC airflow room design. So in our design, we have the supplies at the top of the room, and we have one return per room, kind of on ground level, tucked away in one of the corners. Well, now that we've learned a lot, ideally you want the supplies on the ground on one end of the room on floor level, and then on the opposite end of the room towards the top of the room is where you want your returns. So you're able to pull that cool air completely through your canopy. And then as far as inner canopy airflow design, we've tried duck socks and oversized, fans that are pushing large CFM. But even in a 40-foot row, which is the length of our rows in most of our rooms, it's still not enough. So ideally, you would want to be running fans from either staggered on opposite ends of the room, or you would want them in the same row facing each other, because you're not going to have enough CFMs to push that entire 40 feet, no matter what you think with the duck sock. It doesn't work. So we actually just went back to oscillating fans for the inner canopy airflow, because that just works better. That could be the space of our tiers. It could be the fact that we're doing living soil in these beds and how much moisture that's perspiring into the air. Could be a number of different things, but we found that our airflow and humidity is lower, obviously, on the top tier, but it's easier to control than the inner canopy. So it's really hard to achieve inner canopy airflow without just the right equipment or design.
Yeah, in my home grow, I'm doing a poor man's version of duck socks, essentially, because you can't get the you have to have a certain commercial scale to make it even worthwhile. You're not buying 10 feet of them, for example, or whatever. So I used greenhouse convection tubing that had pre-punched holes in it and hooked that up to a fan. And I've been pretty happy with that in terms of the airflow that I'm getting. So that's been kind of a fun thing. If people want to check it out, I've put it up on Instagram, and I'll be starting another cycle here now that I'm home from the Soil Summit. So yeah, that's really interesting. I appreciate you sharing that. Other than the HVAC, is there anything that you would have done differently in terms of the build itself?
Yeah, I think what we would have gotten, well, one, also reheat. We should have gotten reheat in the HVAC. I think that makes a big difference in preventing temperature swings during the lights off period. Um, I would have gotten better drain placement as well in the rooms. I think that would have helped more. Um, that's pretty much it. I'm pretty happy with their build out and design, but those are like the few things that we would have done differently.
What, where is your current drains in the rooms, and why? Where would you move them to? I actually don't know.
So
Yeah, I don't know that about your
so
rooms.
we have, and this is from partly pushback from the owner too. It's a tough balance with a big project, um, getting your needs across and then also making that argument with the owner or contractor. So he was kind of against getting any floor drains of any kind in the room, but we just have small corner drains, maybe one or two in each of the flower rooms. But I would have done I can't remember the style of the drain, but I would have gotten like more of a continuous run in the front of the room, so you have a bigger drain to like clean your floors and stuff. That also has its challenges because you have to keep that drain constantly clean. But yeah, it just would have helped with just cleaning more with better drain placement.
You're really even lucky to have drains. Honestly, a lot of facilities I work with don't have drains, and then trying to retrofit that sucks. So
It's
yeah,
expensive.
that's good. Yeah. So moving on to the vertical farming aspect, are there any tips or pointers for going vertical? I know you and I talked ahead of time that you would not, in retrospect, go vertical if you weren't forced to based on your building. What are the challenges, and what are some tips?
Oh gosh, I mean, a lot of challenges. It takes longer to do certain tasks because we're utilizing scissor lifts to work on the second tier, just because it's safer than maybe putting up some type of temporary catwalk system or something like that. But so we use scissor lifts. So tasks take longer in that respect. There was a little bit of a learning curve with that, and just getting the team um, to check out the second tier enough to make sure that it's getting adequately watered, scouting for pest pressure, stuff like that. So it's easier to manage stuff that's on the ground floor because we're just walking on it all the time. It's much harder to get your team, even 2 days a week, to spend all day up on the second tier making sure everything's getting taken care of, because of the style of growing that we're doing. We have to give these plants that extra attention to make sure that we're getting boutique quality cannabis. Otherwise, it's just impossible to compete in the established, California market. Um, so yeah, just workflow, um, tips. Yeah, I wouldn't do it if you don't have to do it. That would be a big tip. But um, gosh, yeah, just making the time and scheduling appropriately. Also, I've noticed on the second tier with airflow, the beds can get more of a dry back or just less water. So you just have to make sure they're getting watered adequately, and the humidity is just a little bit lower too. So um, that, and I would grow strains that are easier to manage. So strains that that trellis easy, or you don't have to thin out as much. Yeah, just less canopy management. You would want to put those on your second tier or third tier.
Have you know? Well, I have two questions. So the first one would be, if you had to guess at a percentage of time, how much more time would you say that second tier costs you because you have to utilize scissor lifts, you have to go up and down, it's just harder to get to and access.
Great question. I mean, we probably have, versus like another grow that wasn't growing vertically, we probably have to have 2 to 3 more staff, full-time staff, than what a non-vertical grow would need, for that extra time needing to spend on grow tasks.
So like if you had a task, like, let's just say like defoliating, how long, if it were to take you, I don't know, half a day to do the lower tier, how long would you budget for that upper tier sort of a thing?
Maybe it would take 3/4 of a day or something, because what we would do in that instance, we would try to get at least 2 scissor lifts in that room, so we're having 2 people in each lift, maybe working on opposite sides of each other or in that same row. So I mean, it might add an extra 2 to 4 hours depending on what the task is.
And how much of an issue is stuff dropping down onto that lower canopy? Your plants down below with disturbance or dust or leaf matter when you are defoliating, things like that. Is that an issue at all for you guys?
Yeah, no, definitely. You get some, when you're de-leafing, you get some leaves that drop down. So just having to go through the bottom canopy and just grabbing those, making sure that they're not stuck in that canopy on the bottom tier. I guess another point I should have brought up as far as things or tips for people with vertical grow, or things we would have done differently, is drainage for runoff on your second tier. So we accounted for it, but we didn't account for cracked trays because of the weight of the soil. That was probably the biggest thing. So even if you do have drainage for runoff, we would still get some cracks in those trays. So we get sometimes, if there's too much runoff, which obviously we try to avoid, but with the blue mats, sometimes floods happen. So we've had to hang like 5-gallon construction buckets under those points where the tray might be cracked, just to capture any possible runoff, to prevent that from dripping onto the plants on the bottom tier or dripping onto the lights or the floor. And more importantly, the plants, because if you're getting that runoff water on those plants, you might run into botrytis or some kind of fungal issue later in flower.
Yeah, that would be a challenge. Let's touch on that for people, because I know someone had asked me, like, how deep are your beds?
Oh gosh, ours are at least 14 inches now.
Okay, they're about 14 inches
Yeah.
deep. And oh shoot, I had another question just based on it. Are you in 4x4 beds, 4x8 beds? What are the length,
4x8.
the sizes of your beds? 4x8. This is a question I have, because I'm always trying to talk people into 4x4 beds over a 4x8 bed, because I think it gives you one more replication. So it's a smaller data point or end value, higher end value. And then also, if you have an issue like a cracked tray, maybe you could only remove a half yard of soil instead of a full yard, assuming a 10-inch depth. So you'd actually have more than that anyway. But are there any advantages to a 4x8 other than a slight savings in cost? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. I don't know if I've put too much thought into it. I think the biggest difference between like a 4x4 and a 4x8, as you said, it would be like costs. Like, you might be spending more on components for your irrigation system in a 4x4 versus a 4x8. So maybe more points of failure, or you're just needing more parts. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just felt like a 4x8 was the right move. And in case there was an issue, I felt like it would be easier to deal with that, whether it's like a pathogen or some kind of pest in the soil, like a root feeding nematode or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it would just be, excuse me, just more cost from more parts for like irrigation.
Yeah, I definitely like a smaller, like you said, a 4x8 even. I don't want a 40-foot row of soil if I can avoid it, just because if you do have an issue like a pathogen or something, let's say the fertility gets wacky in a bed, you can always just pull out a smaller section of soil if you ever did have to replace something. So that is kind of future-proofing yourself. You mentioned irrigation. That's an interesting point, and let's start talking about blue mats because the design that we use for blue mats that we've come up with is a 4x4 design that's modular. So it would be the same for me in a 4x4 as it, we just double it in a 4x8. So the number of parts wouldn't change. I know you use blue mats as well because I saw your presentation. We've talked about it. What does your design look like for blue mats? Let's start there, and then we'll talk about your overall feelings about blue mats, pros and cons for people who haven't considered them.
So I've done all kinds of different layouts with blue mats. I've been using them or working with them for at least 6 years now. Initially, we started off with like the drip, not the drip tape, but like the little drippers. We used two different carrots. We use a 6-inch and a 9-inch at different points in the bed. So I've tried that. I've tried the blue soak tape in a variety of different layouts. Currently, or what we did initially with the setup, I think we started with 6-inch carrots, and then we kind of did like almost like a figure 8 type design around the plants. And then we moved to a 9-inch carrot and kind of modified the tape so it would be touching the corners and the sides a little bit more. And then recently, Cooper from Blue Mat, he stopped by with their new design, which is using blue soak tape. It's 4 rows of it running the length of the bed from corner to corner with a pressure reducer manifold. I think it's at like 10 psi. That design has been working great. So the new layout and design that they came up with, I don't know if you were a part of that at all, but that worked out really well. So I'm happy to see that room working. I might fluctuate on the side of overwatered versus underwatered, but I'd rather be overwatered in living soil than underwatered. And then, it's been a challenge though with the blue mats, but we can't hand water all of our rooms. We have 6 flowering rooms, 8,500 square feet of canopy with, the 2 tiers. It's just not feasible. So I needed the blue mats to work. I think they've worked overall, but also, just to be frank, I've also banged my head against the wall dealing with these because it's, we go into rooms where there's floods and water on the floor, and now I'm having to pay staff to, shop vac water for 3 or 4 hours or drain the lines underneath the trays, the drain lines. So it's been a challenge, but also I'm trying to work with them because I need this to work. And I've seen good results with it too, where we've hit really good metrics in living soil with some of the cultivars we're growing. So some good and some bad, but I like the direction that they're heading in. I don't want to spend more money though. We've already spent enough money, installing it.
That's my only complaint with the new manifold design is that all those parts and pieces are more expensive and there are also potential fail points. That being said, I think it's a perfectly good design. We use with the blue mats when we recommend them. We use kind of a spiral similar to your S design, but just more of a spiral with I like the shorter carrot. I want to read the depth a little shorter, a little shallower than the maxi, but it'd be interesting to do to A/B test this because I haven't done that yet. But I think your review of blue mats is very very honest. I think folks going into them should realize that there's a learning curve and there are challenges, but also every irrigation system has the potential for leaks and floods and these things. So there's no perfect solution out there. The only upgrade I would consider would be a commercial system, like something from Dram, where you have a very industrial built-in tensiometer that's reading the moisture content in the bed and then irrigating that bed specifically for that, similar to what the blue mats do. But this would require electricity. It would be very expensive compared to the cost of entry that blue mats offer. So unless you have the budget to really go all in on irrigation management, I think the blue mats are a very good entry level solution for facilities or even for home growers. I'm going to set them up for my next run at my house here. That make sense. So I don't know. Anything you want to add to that?
No, I think you're right. I think blue mat is great for home growers, and it could be great for a commercial setup too. There's definitely a huge learning curve. I think they've learned a lot. They're always making improvements. I like their SOP that they've developed with the hanging drip. But also we're looking into implementing a different style of irrigation in one of our rooms too, because something similar to what you just described, because we already have that capability with our environmental control systems. So for us, it would probably be pretty cheap to set up in one of our rooms and get something like that going, because we already have the infrastructure in place. So we're going to look into that when we get some more money and can afford to do that.
Interesting. Yeah, I have to give credit to the guys over at Sustainable Village for really continuing to innovate with the product and come up with new solutions. So and I really like what they're doing. We also sell blue mats like they do. We just have a slightly different design philosophy, but it's very close, and I think either system would work. So let's move on. Let's talk about soil and fertility management. You mentioned you started with KNF and had good results. That's really interesting. I didn't know any of that part of your journey. I didn't meet you or really connect with you on soil management until much later. What did it look like when you first opened the facility then? And then how did you get to where you are now?
Oh man, yeah, the last year has been huge in just learning a lot about soil fertility, especially living soil or soilless media indoors. I didn't realize the challenges as far as making sure that that soil remains fertile, because we're trying to get 4.5 turns a year per room. So it's not as idealistic as one might think with living soil indoors and trying to be sustainable. And so we started off with fully charged soil from a well-known soil company. Had really good results, good yields at first. And then, I'm just trying to think back. We were mulching at the time. We did some cover cropping, diachondra, mustard, barley, stuff like that. And, learned a lot about companion planting and cover cropping too, what not to do, what you can do. I kind of lean more with where you stand on companion planting indoors. I think it can be more of a problem than beneficial. I think no matter what, you're going to attract pests, even with diachondra. I've seen it. I think it could be good or utilized to maybe to capture pests, kind of like a banker system. But we primarily rely on a mulch layer to keep our rhizosphere going and keeping those microbes and fungi alive. I see better results with that. We've ran into pill bug issues like Steve has talked about with the chop and drop. So we've definitely moved away from that. We've learned a lot about making sure to test all of your inputs in your soil and where you're sourcing your soil, because you don't want to contribute to heavy metals because of, how good a bioaccumulator cannabis is. It'll pick that up no matter what you do. So we've had to deal with heavy metal issues due to some inputs in our soil. I've thrown the kitchen sink at it. We've tried manipulating pH, adding biochar, pulling soil out, adding new soil in, utilizing mushrooms. I've planted hemp before we planted cannabis to try to get it out. We've done a variety of different things. My experience with heavy metals, there's literally nothing you can do unless you want to replace the soil or after so many rounds of just pulling it out naturally with cannabis. So we've had some challenges with that. But also we've had plenty of rooms that have passed just fine and where we haven't had to deal with heavy metals. But soil fertility overall, I've learned, not that we weren't testing our soil before, but I've just come to the realization how important it is to test your soil at the same time. We kind of follow what your guys' SOPs. So just for the audience, we work very closely with Tad and his team, with Brandon. We submit a soil sample around after 8 weeks in flower. So we're kind of getting the same snapshot in time of where rooms are. We try to take different points in the room just to try to get a general idea. And then we go off of Brandon's recommendations or working with them, being like, hey, we need to get our yields up. Can we bump, X, Y, or Z up? So I think it's super critical, especially in a commercial setting where you're trying to hit certain metrics. You need to be doing soil testing, and you need to be making sure that the inputs that you're using are clean and tested.
Yeah, I mention this a lot. When we harvest a plant, we're pulling out organic matter and we're pulling out nutrients, and those things need to be replaced every cycle. So it's important that we take that into account when we're thinking about harvest. And also to clarify for listeners, you originally did not have our soil in the facility. That wasn't contributing to your heavy metal issues when you were dealing with that. In case anyone was listening, we've been pretty successful at sort of mitigating heavy metals, I would say, but there are all the challenges that you listed in terms of understanding your inputs, and knowing that tests can be I don't want to say tests can be manipulated, but it's important to know it's important to do your own testing. And one thing that you and I talked about off air beforehand was I had done some testing with a lab that was using XRF technology instead of ICP-MS. And I did not fully understand it at the time. And what I did not realize was that the detection limits for that technology were not stringent enough to give me the information that I needed to make a good decision. So for example, and I'm going to make up some numbers here, but they'll be close. For arsenic, it might not detect anything under 6 ppm. So it'll give back a non-detectable level as an answer. Or for lead, it might be 10 ppm, and so it comes back non-detectable. So if I had 9 ppm of lead and 5 ppm of arsenic in that soil or in that product, it would come back non-detectable as if it was not there. And those levels are just frankly too high in a regulatory market to feel comfortable passing. So you have to understand the test, and I would just throw out as a guide, don't trust tests you see on social media to necessarily reflect what's in the actual product that you're receiving. That's just some advice for folks. Do you want to add anything to that, Chris? Or
I mean,
and move on?
No, I mean, I think that's fantastic points. Yeah, you have to understand the method of testing or the equipment that you're using and making sure that it's accurate enough so you can feel comfortable with the decision that you're making sure that the soil or inputs you're using are clean. And just to add on, yeah, you can't take what someone posts on social media as just truth or accurate when it comes to testing. Like Tad said, you have to do your own testing and due diligence. It's I can't stress that enough.
And now you've got a program that seems to be working. You have some of our soil in the facility now, but not exclusively. And it seems like you've figured out how to manage and pass successfully now, which is awesome. So, because California has very tight regulations around heavy metals.
Yeah, no, things are looking up and much better, and we're happy to be working with you guys. You guys are providing all the soil for our veg and mom program, so that soil is getting put back into our flower rooms, and we're using other inputs that you provide as well. But things have been great, man. So, but yeah, lots of learning, because again, it's like we have to hit certain metrics because it is a business, and we have to make sure that there is enough fertility in that soil to hit those metrics. And it's just different in a soilless media setup.
Are you adding any nutrients mid-cycle, any teas, KNF, ferment, stuff like that? I don't actually know the answer to a lot of these questions, so it's good. It's great to hear.
We do, but that we try to do low cost input. So we definitely utilize compost extracts and teas, and that's compost sourced from Catalyst Bioamendments. Their material is amazing. So we use those, and then we do some soil drenches, some foliar feeds. But again, it's like a cost perspective. It's like, okay, because if you're doing soil drenches with all kinds of biostimulants, or you're trying to add potassium or calcium, or humic or fulvic, or aloe or coconut or whatever it may be, well, that costs a lot. The more you're scaling up. So we try to do at least 1 or 2 drenches of some of those things I just mentioned, and compost teas and extracts. We try to keep it really simple. After hearing Eli speak at the Soil Summit and what he's doing with KNF and fermented plant juices, I am going to be looking back into that because he has been doing testing on his input. So I'm going to be looking into different fermented plant juices as like a potassium source or just a good sugar source, because it's always good to get sugars into your living soil system, because I think that makes a big difference in your end product. And doing all these little things, it definitely adds up, and you can see how much of a better product you end up getting.
That's awesome. And I have to say, I've heard really great stuff about the cannabis you guys are producing from Nelson over at Poetry Plants, and then in-house with Brandon Hudson, our in-house agronomist grower guy. So kudos to you guys for producing a quality product.
Appreciate it, man.
And one thing I just want to mention, when you mentioned the fermented plant juices for folks, you can absolutely make those yourselves. There's plenty of information on how to do that. You don't necessarily need to buy it. If you do go down that route, keep an eye on sodium and chlorides. Those are 2 things that I would want to test, because I've been seeing a lot more sodium and chlorides on my test results, and those are 2 things that you want to keep low on a soil test. And compost is probably the biggest source for that, possibly water if we talk about that as well. But I have seen pretty high sodium and chloride levels in some commercially produced FPJs. So just keep an eye on it and make sure if you are adding it, because that's something that's going to impact your soil long term, and may require flushing or leaching out of your beds at some point. But yeah, I enjoyed Eli's talk too, hearing about how people are successfully using these techniques to save money. I mean, I think you're trading labor for money at that point, because you're kind of making your own nutrients.
Totally.
And if that makes sense, then I fully support it. Some places you just don't have time to do that kind of work, but I think it can produce a very high quality flower, as has been shown. So that's great.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, couple last questions for you, Chris. I appreciate this. Let's take a look at this from a home grow perspective. I'm sure cultivating commercially has changed your views on cultivation. So what principles would you apply if you were setting up a home grow? Like what's sort of the same and what's different?
Well, a lot would be the same in terms of just, moisture, water management. That's always the number one thing I'm looking at, is making sure that the soil is adequately watered, and we're not underwatered or overwatered. And I'd say, 90% of growers probably overwater, or new growers. And then as far as what would be different, it would be my ability just to give more attention to less plants, or just a smaller grow. So with that, you can do a lot of the smaller things like I mentioned. You can do a lot of these inputs of humic, fulvic, every other day, even if it's just a light drench, or your FPJ or your aloe, your coconut, stuff like that. Over a period of a flowering cycle, it's going to make a big difference in your home grow. And that's why, I think what we're doing, we are producing some of the cleanest and some of the best flower in the world. But I also know that a small home grow, or like a 6 liter or 10 liter, they're going to have better batches and probably slightly better flower than us, just because they can give it that much more attention, or they're just giving those inputs, over a period of that flowering cycle. And there's certain, measurements or things maybe we can't measure yet, as far as what makes a living soil or soilless media product better than a synthetically grown. Because, a lot of people say, well, the plant doesn't know the difference between a carbon-based nutrient or amendment versus a synthetic one. Okay, that may be true, but what's happening with that microbial or fungal life that's leading to a superior product? You can't say THC percentage or even terpenes necessarily. So it's other factors or variables that we're not able to measure yet. So it's just interesting to think about too, like what is going on in the soil, because like you see with hash competitions or even flower competitions, and the people that win those, it's usually living soil growers, indoor or outdoor.
Yeah, and you essentially said a lot of what Bryant Mason, Soul Doctor, says in regards to cultivation, and this idea that if we can just keep feeding small amounts of carbon to our plants, which is what a lot of most of these amendments and teas are just little bits of carbon, that we're creating an optimal environment for soil health and plant health. So yeah, I feel like you really nailed it with that. Is there anything else you'd like to share regarding from a cultivation perspective? Otherwise, I guess, I'll let you answer that, and then I have one last thing for you.
I guess one thing I've noticed with PPFD and light intensity with LEDs, in a smaller setup, when you're able to do those, small inputs over the course of that flowering period, I was able to increase my PPFD much more than in a commercial setting. And I think that's based off of like what's actually available for the plant to uptake and use. And I think in our commercial setting, we're relying on, that micro and macro life to kind of break down what we're putting in to make it available. And then with those small inputs on a smaller scale, I think those inputs are available more quickly, So I think it's a different perspective when driving PPFD in a smaller setting versus a commercial setting, at least in my experience with living soil or soilless media. Because in the facility currently, I'm not going to push more than 800 or 900 ppfd depending on the strain, and that's even with 1200 ppm CO2. I've just noticed a lot of strains can't take that much ppfd, but in our R&D facility, I was able to push anywhere from 1200 to 1500 ppfd without seeing any negative drawbacks or negative effects on the plant.
And you were doing a lot more applications of fertility applications too at that time, right? All the KNF stuff and other Ts, it sounds like. And I assume you're supplementing. So when I think of PPFD, I immediately go to CO2. So I would assume you were also supplementing CO2 in the other facility.
Yep.
Because as a home grow, if you're not supplementing CO2, I would not play around with levels over 800 or 900. Your plant just can't keep up.
Yeah, there's just no way.
Cool. Well, then last thing, Flora Flame, I think you guys have a fun slogan, sort of a company company mission that you put on your containers. Your packaging, you want to share that with folks?
Yeah, sure. So we came up with this phrase when we were going through our rebranding, which I regret, and we're actually going back to our old logo. But we came up with this great phrase that kind of represents who we are as a brand and a company. And so that phrase is small batch indoor flower grown with love in living soil by humans who give a fuck. So I wouldn't have started this brand if one, I wasn't a cannabis user, and two, if I didn't believe in the medicinal qualities of the plant and wanting to produce a product that not only that I consume myself on the daily, but something that I can stand behind and be proud and want to share with people to use. So yeah, I think it's a great slogan. I tell people, well, we're the largest vertical indoor living soil farm currently in the world, but also we're only a small, mom and pop owned facility. Like we're only 8,500 square feet of canopy. It's not like we're this big, conglomerate glass house. So yeah, that's our phrase, our slogan.
Awesome. Well, I hope folks in the Bay Area will try it out if they're ever visiting or something when they go to a dispensary. And I appreciate you sharing. That was the one thing about this Soul Summit that I really appreciated is that we're a community. And even though we might have slight differences in how we cultivate, at the end of the day, we're all trying to push what we think is most sustainable or regenerative and environmentally friendly and appropriate. So yeah, it's a cool community of folks that fall into this sort of living soil camp for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. We're the minority, but like we said, we believe in it, and we think this is the most sustainable way to cultivate indoors and the most regenerative way to cultivate outdoors.
Awesome. Well, thanks, man. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and thanks again.
Yeah, Tad, thank you for having me. I hope the audience could get something from our talk, but yeah, it was a pleasure being on, and I continue to look forward to growing our relationship and working with you guys as we grow too.
That was Chris Castle, and you are listening to the Cannabis Cultivation and Science podcast. If you like the podcast, please leave us a rating and review and give us a follow on Instagram and YouTube. And don't forget, at Kiss Organics, we have a wider range of products we offer on our website, ranging from soils, amendments, beneficial insects, soil test analysis, and consulting. Thanks for listening.